Joining us now to discuss President-elect Trump's visit to Notre Dame is David Engels, Chair of Roman History at the University of Brussels. David, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I want to get your reaction first. Were you surprised by Trump's announcement? Because I sure didn't have this on my bingo card.
Yeah, exactly. I was quite surprised when I heard about that visit, because this visit is happening in a situation of, let's say, a series of awkward situations. On the one hand, of course, as you know, most European leaders are quite ill at ease with Trump's access to power. There has been a lot of propaganda against Donald Trump. So now his visit is, of course, putting a lot of people in an awkward position. And then, of course, there's also another awkward position, and that is the persecution of Christians and Christianity in Europe, especially in France. I mean, this entire renovation of Notre Dame is happening in a climate in France that is extremely contested. We have churches vandalized or burning nearly every week in France, and a lot of governments who are not necessarily very strong in protecting Christian interests, but who are rather speaking about diversity, integration, tolerance, multiculturalism, mass migration, and so forth. So there is, let's say, quite an awkward situation that is surrounding this surprise visit by the president-elect.
David, we'll get back to the issue of this religious divide in France in a moment. But first, Trump visiting this reopening ceremony, this is the president-elect of the most powerful country in the world attending this event. Now, does this give some sort of significance to France as a country and this ceremony? I mean, what kind of message is Trump sending out here?
It is a very interesting message that is probably also reinforcing many of the conservatives in Europe, because it shows that the US and Europe are, of course, or should be, united around Christian values, around a common history, around a common cultural identity. And that is something that you do not hear very often in Europe. In Europe, generally, Christianity is not often spoken about in political circles. It is rather put a little bit aside. Generally, it is associated by the political elites, especially of the European Union, as being part of a medieval obscurantist past one wants to forget about. So the fact that Trump is specifically visiting Europe for the first time for this inauguration of Notre Dame sends, of course, a very strong a message that is very unusual in most parts of the old continent for the moment.
David, talk a little bit about the cathedral's history in relation to France's religious history and how Trump's visit, in a way, kind of gives recognition to religious beliefs and religious groups.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was very interesting to see when Notre Dame burned, how the reactions played out, and it was really funny and touching, of course, also to see how many people who are proclaimed atheists or at least agnostics, who generally do not speak about Christianity or do not really like Christianity, had this impression that this was going too far, that somehow something that was fundamental for their own identity, even if they are non-believers, was being destroyed and needed to be reconstructed. So there was some form of general, let's say, outcry in many milieus in France about this event. Until now, there are a lot of theories, sometimes also conspiracy theories, on the real reasons of the burning of Notre Dame, because until now, finally, there has never been any, let's say, absolutely convincing explanations, and there are so many other churches and even cathedrals who have been burned because of arson also in these last years, that the suspicions are still there with Notre Dame. And of course, there have been a lot of disputes also about the modalities of the reconstruction, because we should not forget that if we now get a quite correct reconstitution of Notre Dame as it was, or as she was before, this was not, let's say, absolutely certain from the beginning. Especially President Macron had first this idea that perhaps Notre Dame should be transformed into some form of museum, a museum of liturgical art. So there was these steps towards a historization of a monument. One wanted not necessarily to desacralize, but to put into a context where it was not living anymore, but having this museal aspect. So it is a great thing that there has been a reconstitution, at least of the architectural elements in accordance to how Notre Dame looked just before the incident. But we shouldn't forget also that there's a lot of disputes going on for the moment in French circles about the new liturgical objects that have been created now for the renovated church, and which are extremely modernist. So there's a lot of, let's say, dissatisfaction with many people saying that the entire new interior is disfiguring the ancient impression that the church was giving. So, I mean, this visit on the one hand is a strong sign, but it is happening in a situation where Christianity on the old continent in most countries is really endangered and needs a lot of support. So I think that most conservatives in Europe are quite happy to see that on the other hand on the other side of the Atlantic, which is unfortunately often associated precisely with atheism and ultra-liberalism and whatever, there is now more support for Christianity and also, of course, for Catholic Christianity.
And David, really quick here, talk a little bit about this religious divide specifically in France, especially between Muslims and Christians. Do you see this reopening of Notre Dame kind of helping to bridge the divide in a way?
No, certainly not. No. I would say there are not just Christians and Muslim. I think there is a tripartite division because probably the most important, most influential group in France for the moment are, of course, radical secularist, laicist people who do not like Christianity, who would like to see Christian churches either demolished or transformed into museums, who would like to expulse as much as possible traces of Christian heritage from school books, from public monuments, from memories, from institutions, from constitutions, from official celebrations. And so I would say that the reopening is happening in a situation where we have these three groups who are in contest, or rather, let's say that there is this uneasy alliance between, let's say, a leftist, liberal, atheist group that is using mass migration and especially, of course, the integration of Islam into European and French society as a means of relativizing Christianity and pushing it aside. And then, of course, Christian milieus who are clearly outnumbered for the moment, who are trying to cling somehow to their actual or to their present position. Even the Rassemblement National, the strongest party in France, who is generally considered as being right-wing or conservative or whatever, is not entirely outspoken in the defense of Christianity, but is rather also quite divided between, on the one hand, Christian traditionalists, and on the other hand, people who are more advocating Republican, secularist, or at least anti-Christian, or at least non-Christian points of view.
Okay, David, quickly before we go here, we've got around 30 seconds. Let's talk about international relations a little. Trump specifically thanked the French president in his announcement about this visit. And of course, Notre Dame is also an extremely popular tourism spot for visitors from around the world. Do you think Trump's visit could somehow help improve U.S. relations with France and even the EU as a whole?
Well, I mean, we have to accept that unfortunately the countries of the European Union are not in power, have abandoned most of their means of power during these last years, and so now as they are faced with the presidency of Trump, which they have loathed and rejected for years and years, they are in this awkward situation that now they have to submit. And that is precisely what President Macron will be doing as the others. On the one hand, there will be this this talk rather about democratic talking points like liberty, democracy, whatever, and talking points against so-called populism and fascism and so on, with which, of course, they are meaning Trump. But on the other hand, they are clearly in an inferior situation when it comes to the realities of power, and so one way or the other, they will submit, at least in the face of Donald Trump. So this will not be, let's say, a very uplifting spectacle.
Well, it's certainly going to be an interesting trip, that's for sure. David Engels, Chair of Roman History at the University of Brussels, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation.